Welcome to the Pardes channel. Today we explain Prophets Isaiah chapter 14 in a clear and simple way, step by step.
Okay, let's dive into this. We're going to walk through this chapter methodically. We'll start with the context of Isaiah 14, then look at the mighty are fallen, followed by the arrogant boast, and clarifying the text. After that, we'll pull together the key ideas and meaning, and wrap it all up with some practical lessons and a quick recap.
Part 1. Context of Isaiah 14.
So to really get what's going on here, we have to drop right into the middle of the prophet's declaration. Isaiah is speaking directly to the king of Babylon. Now, remember, this was the ruler of a massive ancient empire that held absolute power over the known world, including the people of Israel. But right before we get to the king's dramatic downfall, verses 1 through 10 set this beautiful stage. The text explains that Israel will ultimately be restored to their land. God is going to give them rest from their sorrow, from their fear, and from their really hard bondage. And on that day of rest, they're going to take up a proverb, a taunting song against their former oppressor, the king of Babylon. Verses 4 through 10 describe the whole earth suddenly just breathing a sigh of relief. It's finally at peace because this great oppressor is gone. Even the cedar trees of Lebanon are rejoicing, basically saying, hey, no one is coming to cut us down anymore. The whole earth just breaks out into singing. Now, to truly understand this taunt and the rest of the chapter, we have to rely strictly on a method called peshat. Peshat is just the basic literal meaning of the text right in its actual context. We are absolutely not looking for deep mysticism, hidden codes, or Kabbalistic interpretations today. None of that. We just want to know exactly what the prophet was saying in plain, simple language about this completely human, earthly ruler, his actions, and his total downfall. Keeping this literal context front and center is really the master key to unlocking the entire sequence of this chapter.
Part 2. The mighty are fallen. Let me tell you, Isaiah does not hold back. He paints this incredibly visceral picture of what happens when massive human empires inevitably collapse. In verse 11, the imagery is just jarring. It says, "The maggot is spread under thee, and the worms cover thee." I mean, think about who he is talking to here. This is the king of Babylon. This is a guy who slept on the absolute finest linens, surrounded by unimaginable wealth, total luxury, and thousands of servants catering to his every whim. But the plain, literal meaning here shows us the ultimate end of all that earthly power. When he descends into the grave, all that pomp, all the noise of his fancied stringed instruments, it's completely brought down. Instead of a royal, cushioned bed, his mattress is literally maggots. Instead of a heavy, golden embroidered blanket, he's covered by a quilt of worms. The text is purposely using this uncomfortable, literal imagery of physical decay to drive home a universal truth. There is absolutely no amount of human power or wealth that can protect you from the reality of the grave.
Moving right into verse 12, listen closely to the massive contrast here. How art thou fallen from heaven, O day stars, son of the morning? How art thou cut down to the ground, that didst cast lots over the nations? Just notice the stark contrast between his previous perceived heavenly heights and his brand new reality, being cut down to the literal dirt. This was a king who used to cast lots over nations. That means he conquered ruthlessly. He divided up territories like it was a game, and he single-handedly controlled the fate of entire countries. He strutted around like a god among mortals. And now, he has plummeted completely out of the sky and crashed right into the very soil he used to rule.
Now, you might be wondering about that specific phrase from the verse we just read, so let's clarify it. Day star, son of the morning. Because we are sticking strictly to the peshat, the plain, literal meaning, we need to understand this somewhat difficult Hebrew title in simple English, without attaching any mythical beings or supernatural creatures to it. This is purely a poetic metaphor. It's describing a mortal human king's former brightness and his perceived high status. It's basically comparing his earthly glory to the brightest star you see in the morning sky just before dawn. It's a title highlighting his human majesty, his overwhelming arrogance, and his earthly radiance. And honestly, setting him up with that radiant title just makes his total collapse to the ground even more shocking and humiliating for everyone watching it happen.
Part 3. The Arrogant Boast. So, we know the king has fallen, but we have to ask, why? What was the fatal flaw that caused his utter destruction? Well, Isaiah actually takes us straight into the very mind and heart of the Babylonian king to reveal the extreme pride that led to his ruin. In verse 13, the prophet exposes the king's inner thoughts. "And thou saidest in thine heart,
I will ascend into heaven. Above the stars of God will I exalt my throne, and I will sit upon the mount of meeting, in the uttermost parts of the north. If we analyze this step by step, just notice the repeated ego on display here. I will ascend. I will exalt my throne. I will sit. This highlights a boundless, completely unchecked ego. He isn't just content with ruling the entire earth, he literally wants to elevate his power above the stars. He's essentially challenging the heavens themselves. And verse 14 brilliantly illustrates the absolute pinnacle of this pride. He says, I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will be like the Most High. This is it. This is the ultimate arrogant boast of a mortal man. He has entirely forgotten his human limitations. He actually believes his own hype, genuinely thinking he can usurp the divine realm and be on equal footing with the creator of the universe. It's the absolute peak of human arrogance, setting himself in direct opposition to God's authority. He's confusing his massive military and political conquest with divine omnipotence.
Part 4. Clarifying the text.
Now we transition over to the direct consequences of the king's boast. We've seen the unbelievable pride, and now we need to look carefully at the reality of the prophet's words to understand the exact punishment for such overwhelming arrogance. The answer to the king's boast comes incredibly swiftly in verse 15. The text says, Yet thou shalt be brought down to the netherworld, to the uttermost parts of the pit. Notice the sudden and absolute reversal here. The king just finished saying, I will ascend, but the text forcefully replies, Thou shalt be brought down. His fate is sealed. He isn't going up to the clouds, he is going deep, deep down into the earth. The crucial point here is this stark comparison. His boast was about ascending above the clouds to be exactly like the Most High. The reality? He is brought down to the netherworld, straight into the pit. This is the profound irony of the human condition. The very man who tried to climb his way into heaven, who cast lots over nations and literally terrified the globe, is dragged down into the earth, entirely powerless to stop his own demise. His end is exactly as low as his ambitions were high.
Let's make sure we clarify these terms, just to ensure we are strictly sticking to the plain meaning here. The words netherworld, which is Sheol in Hebrew, and pit in the text refer quite simply to the grave. We are talking about physical death. The grave is the great equalizer for all of humanity. It genuinely doesn't matter if you are the mighty king of Babylon or the absolute lowliest servant in his empire. When death comes, you end up in the exact same dirt. The prophet uses these terms to emphasize that despite all his grand illusions of being divine, the king is just a mortal man. And verses 16 through 20 continue this really grim reality. The text details how people will eventually stare at his unburied corpse. They'll marvel at it, squinting at him, asking, wait, is this the man that made the earth tremble, that did shake kingdoms? He won't even get a proper royal burial. While other kings get to lie in glory in their own fancy tombs, he is cast out like a despised, broken branch, trodden underfoot, because he destroyed his own land and he killed his own people. The legacy of evildoers, the prophet declares, will not be named forever.
Part 5. Key ideas and meaning. Having walked through this text step by step, let's pull back for a second and synthesize the main takeaways from our careful reading. What exactly is the core message of Prophet Isaiah chapter 14? First, arrogant rulers eventually fall. No empire lasts forever, especially those built on boundless ego and cruelty. Second, human power has very strict limits. You can control massive armies, sure, but you cannot conquer the heavens. Third, as we just discussed, death is the great equalizer. It claims absolutely everyone, regardless of their status or wealth. Fourth, we see how the Hebrew Bible uses brilliant poetic imagery, like the day star and the maggots, to convey very literal, grounded truths about human history and our mortality. Finally, to make sure we grasp the complete picture of this chapter, verses 21 through 32 actually expand this exact theme beyond just Babylon. The chapter concludes with God promising to cut off the name and remnant of Babylon entirely, turning it into literal pools of water. Then, God swears an oath to break the Assyrian Empire in his land, and the chapter finishes off with a really severe warning to Philistia not to rejoice, because an even worse judgment is coming upon them. The overall key idea here is that God's absolute judgment on human arrogance and cruelty applies not just to Babylon, but to all nations and all rulers. Part 6. Practical Lessons and Recap. Now, it is time to ask the most important question for any focused learner. How do we actually apply the wisdom of the prophet to improve our own lives today? This text isn't just some ancient history lesson about dead empires. It's a mirror for our own behavior. I want to guide you slowly through these practical, actionable steps based on what we've just read. First, practice humility daily. Look, we may not be the king of Babylon, but we all have moments where our ego completely takes over, right? Second, recognize our human limitations. We are not the Most High, and we just cannot control everything around us. Third, avoid arrogant boasting. Whenever you catch yourself saying, I will, with zero regard for others, for the fragility of life, or for God, remember verse 13. Stop and check yourself. And fourth, remember our shared mortality. Keeping in mind that we all ultimately end up in the same earth helps us treat one another with so much more compassion, fairness, and respect while we are still here.
To cement today's lesson, here is a brief, literal recap of the whole narrative arc we just studied. A mortal king, the ruler of Babylon, oppressed the earth and dreamed of literally conquering the heavens through his own massive arrogance and pride. But the prophet declares that this mighty oppressor was ultimately claimed by the dirt. He was brought down to the grave in complete humiliation, just like any other human being, proving once and for all that God alone holds ultimate authority over history.
I want to leave you with a final provocative thought. If the absolute most powerful ruler of the ancient world, a man who possessed literally everything the earth had to offer, was brought completely low by his own pride, how carefully should we guard our own hearts against that very same arrogance? Thank you for learning with us. If this helped you understand the chapter better, like, subscribe, and join us for the next chapter.